Chapter 20. The First Wand. When Tom described the Barrow Downs, Dewey felt a chill of recognition. He had heard of that place before. Once sacred to the Dunedain of the North, it had served as the capital of Cardolan after Arnor split. But with the rise of the Witch King of Angmar, the chief of the Nazgul under Sauron, and the ravages of a terrible plague, Cardolan fell. The land emptied, the Barrow Downs slipped into the Witch King's dominion, and the dead Dunedain laid in their tombs were twisted by dark sorcery into the thing of nightmares, the Barrow-wights. What had been a sacred burial ground became a place no one dared approach. Dewey listened as Tom continued. The Dunedain were descended from the Númenóreans, once powerful enough to capture Sauron himself. Only later, when Númenóreans were seduced into defying the gods and sailing to Valinor, did they bring ruin on themselves and sink their island. But in life, they had been mighty, and in death, under the Witch King's influence, deadly still. The tombs were filled with kings and nobles buried with their jewelry, weapons, and armor. If Dewey wanted a sharp tool capable of cutting a tree heart, the Barrows were as likely a source as any. The problem was the Wights. Wights' bodies are hard as iron, Tom said. They have terrible strength and move like lightning. Most people don't even see them before they are struck. They come with a thick mist. Their tracks are meaningless. If a Wight curses you, you weaken, die, and can be turned into one yourself. Ordinary weapons barely harm them. Any wounds mend quickly. Dewey's expression grew grave. They sounded worse than the Ents he'd faced in the Old Forest. Do they have any weaknesses? He asked. There is one, Tom admitted. They fear sunlight. Expose them to it and they fade. But they make their own fog, so even in daylight, the Barrow Downs are dangerous. If you go, do not let them near you. If you find yourself in a bank of mist, assume a Wight is hiding inside. Dewey bowed his head in thanks and decided for now to postpone the Barrow Downs. He needed to grow stronger before he could risk such a place. He turned instead to the willow wand he'd already fashioned, a practice piece he'd kept for sentiment. Since a true tree heart wand was out of reach, he would finish this willow wand and use it in the meantime. A wand has two parts, the shaft and the core. The shaft was done, the core was the problem. In the north, there were no unicorns or phoenixes for hair or feather, and dragons, such as the one in the Lonely Mountain, were far beyond his current strength. He watched the garden, wondering where to find a magical core, and his gaze settled on Goldberry, sitting among her water lilies, combing her long hair. She was the river daughter. Her hair must hold water magic of its own. If any strand could make an excellent wand core, it would be hers. Lady Goldberry, Dewey asked, rising, may I have a strand of your hair? Hey, boy, Goldberry is mine. Tom leapt up, frowning at Dewey with abrupt possessiveness. Goldberry smiled and gently took Tom's hand. Her eyes were mild and amused. Tell me why you need it, she asked. Dewey hurried to explain. My wand needs a core. If I'm rude to ask, forgive me. Goldberry waved it off. Casually, she plucked a golden strand and handed it to him. Is this enough? I can give more if you need it. Enough, thank you, Dewey blurted, worried Tom might glare him to death if she supplied more. He cradled the strand and felt the clear, cool current of river magic in it. It was perfect. Tom, however, could not be outdone. If Goldberry gives one, I'll give a beard hair too, he grumbled, and produced a thick hair from his own beard. To Dewey's surprise, it twined itself with Goldberry's strand and fused into a thicker filament, golden braided with chestnut. He had expected conflict between the two magics, but instead they harmonized, and their power seemed multiplied. Now, with a core and a shaft, Dewey set about learning the craft. He knew a wand was more than wood and magic fiber. It required rites, timing, and care. He began by gathering dew, morning water that the sun hadn't touched, till he had a small basin full. He soaked the willow shaft and the braided core in the dew, and left them beneath the moonlight for 7 nights. That would bring out the deepest properties of both wood and hair. Next, he sought resin. In the old forest, he found a giant pine and a lacquer tree. Both were hostile spirits. He used a binding spell, Petrificus Totalis, to pacify them briefly. Before dawn, with a knife and steady hands, he opened their bark and collected pine resin and lacquer sap. With these, he could seal the core and the shaft and bind the magics together. The construction itself was precise. He bored a small, neat cavity from the wand's tip, deep enough for the braided core, and carved runes into the inner walls to act as conversion nodes. With long tweezers, he inserted the hair, spreading it so it lay true. He melted pine resin and poured it in, easing out bubbles until the resin set and the hair and wood became one. When it dried, he sanded the wand smooth and painted it with lacquer until it shone. Even then, it wasn't finished. Dew waited for another full moon. On that night, he stood alone with his wand, holding it under pale light and moving it in measured patterns as he intoned the activation rites. He chanted a long sequence of words he had learned and improvised, Runix inscribere, Spiritus orari resonantia, and the moonlight gathered into a silvery mist that the wand drank in. As he poured his will through the gestures and words, he felt something answering, a faint, steady heartbeat from the shaft, as if the wand were waking. When at last he whispered, Lumos, a ball of clear light blossomed at the tip and chased the shadows away. Dewey smiled as the glow warmed his hand. His first wand had come alive. It was only when the finished wand was finally in his hand that Dewey noticed a real change. If the magic inside him was water in a reservoir, the wand was the valve that controlled its flow. Wandless casting was like digging a hole in the dam. Magic could still escape, but it was wild and unpredictable. One slip, and the breach could become a deluge, catastrophic in the wrong hands. More importantly, producing the same effect with a wand used only a tenth of the power of wandless casting. The output was steady and sustained. The act of casting became far easier. Dewey gripped the wand and felt elation flood him. He was not the sort to stubbornly insist that wandless magic was superior. Humans had always risen above other creatures because they thought and used tools. Wands were no different. Wizards could wield power precisely because they had wands, which let them dominate dangerous magic and become the masters of the magical world. If wandless casting were all that mattered, many magical beings in the world, goblins, house elves, would be on equal footing with wizards. They could work wandlessly and even ignore anti-apparition charms. Yet goblins ran banks for wizards, and house elves served wizards. Both depended on wizarding society. Still, Dewey resolved not to abandon wandless practice entirely. There was always a what-if, and he didn't want to be helpless without a wand. Excited, he tried every spell he knew. Most worked on the first try and felt stronger and more controlled than ever before. Tom and Goldberry, who had watched Dewey make the wand, stood nearby. Seeing him cast, Tom's curiosity was immediate. He asked to try the wand. Dewey handed it over and taught him a few incantations. Tom waved the wand, and golden musical notes spilled from its tip, bright and lively. They weren't just sound, they carried magic. The notes multiplied and spread, turning into a joyful, shimmering melody that rolled through the trees. Under that music, the forest's malice slackened. The resentment that had clung to the old trees eased and turned to peace. Dewey, closest to the source, felt it most deeply. The music filled him with a genuine, fearless joy, not a potion's false euphoria, but a warmth that seemed to touch the heart and push away all sorrow and dread. Tom could use the wand to make this magic, and he made it beautifully, but he couldn't cast Dewey's spells. "I can make the same effects," Tom told him, "but it's different in nature. Your spells follow one principle, my music follows another." Dewey expected that, but the music intrigued him. It had no destructive force, yet its ability to dispel negative emotion and instill positive feelings seemed immensely useful, especially as a counter to the dark arts. He knew the dark arts were powerful but corrosive. They warped the caster's body, soul, and mind. That was why the magical world forbade them so strictly. The unforgivable curses, for example, brought imprisonment in Azkaban. Dewey suspected that as he progressed and signed at more places, he would inevitably encounter dark arts. If he wanted to grow stronger, he probably couldn't avoid them. So finding a benign magic that could blunt the dark arts' damage touched him deeply. He asked Tom, without shame, if he could learn the music. Tom agreed, but his first lesson surprised Dewey. They would sing together. "This magic has no single spell," Tom explained. "It's music from the heart. You must sing, loudly, with feeling. The deeper the emotion, the stronger the magic." Dewey's voice was neither rough nor beautiful. It embarrassed him to sing. Still, with his face flushed, he followed Tom's lead, learning the songs line by line and being gently urged to put more feeling into them. Goldberry sat among the water lilies, weaving and smiling as she watched the two of them. Under Tom's patient instruction, Dewey stumbled through the tunes until at last he could make the magic. When he waved the wand himself, nimble golden notes leaped out and tinkled around him, bright and cheerful. They did not carry as far as Tom's. Dewey's music stayed close, but it worked, and that was enough. He also discovered he could produce the same effect without the wand simply by singing. The difference was like singing in the heart versus projecting it outward. For Dewey, the wand was less embarrassing than open singing, so he preferred the former. After staying with Tom and Goldberry for some time, now armed with his first wand and having learned music magic, Dewey prepared to leave for the Barrow Downs. He needed tools sharp enough to carve the iron-hard hearts of certain trees, and he also wanted to try signing in there. Tom and Goldberry, accustomed to partings after long lives, didn't try to detain him. At their farewell, Tom pressed a hand-drawn map into Dewey's hands. It marked the place where the sharp tools could be found with clear, precise symbols that made it seem as if Tom had been there himself. Goldberry presented a final gift, a black wizard's cloak and robe trimmed in silver, made in a style like those worn by wizards of Middle-earth. The cloth was woven from black swan feathers and silver thread and had been blessed. The robe resisted wear and stayed clean. The cloak held a concealing charm that made the wearer easy to overlook. Dewey was overwhelmed. "Goldberry, this is too precious," he stammered, touched by the generosity. He had done nothing for them, but had been given so much. "Take it," Goldberry said with that same gentle smile, folding the garments into his arms. "This is Tom's and my wish for you. Your path will take you far. May this keep you warm." "Take it, Duir," Tom added, half teasing. "Don't disappoint Goldberry. She spent days weaving it." At their urging, he put the robe and cloak on. His old clothes, what he'd worn when he transmigrated, had only held together because of repair charms. Now, wrapped in black and silver, he looked transformed. The cloak shaded him. The robe hung in a way that made him seem both mysterious and composed. For the first time, he really looked like a wizard. Chapter 22. The Barrow Downs. The source of the Withywindle lay in the deepest valley of the river's upper reaches. Dewey followed the map Tom had given him and walked upstream until he reached that sheltered hollow. This spring, said to be under Goldberry's guardianship, the river spirit of the Withywindle, had somehow remained untainted by the dark powers that infested the Barrow Downs. It felt like an island of purity in a land of rot. After a brief rest, Dewey left the valley and headed straight for the Barrow Downs. Above those low hills, the sky was a permanent leaden ceiling. Fog clung to the slopes and daylight seemed to evaporate before it reached the earth. There were no birdsong, no insects, an absence that made the place feel wrong in the bones. Even in daylight, whites were best avoided, so Dewey kept his guard up. He cast a shield charm before he ventured too far. His wand had strengthened the charm. The invisible shield had become a full protective shell, an all-around barrier that would blunt ordinary attacks. That gave him some confidence as he approached the burial mounds. Once the capital of Cardolan, after the split of Arnor, the Barrow Downs now lay scattered with ruined cities and great fallen stones. In the Second Age, Numenor had sunk, Elendil had come to Middle-earth and established Arnor, the northern realm of the Dunedain. In 861 of the Third Age, Arnor fractured into Arthedain, Rudor, and Cardolan. Cardolan's seat is the plain Dewey walked now. In 1409, the Witch King of Angmar launched his war against Arnor. Cardolan's prince fell defending the capital, the kingdom was destroyed, and a terrible plague followed. The Barrow Downs became a place of death. The Witch King poured his malice into the land, turning the tomb's sleepers into his servants, the Barrow Wights, and over 1,000 years the hills became a place even the boldest adventurers avoided. Passing travelers would cross elsewhere rather than risk the night here. After 2 hours walking, Dewey reached the mounded hills. Low barrows dotted the slope, simple, unadorned tombs of northern Dunedain princes and nobles, shrouded in mist, crumbling, and exuding a chill that set his teeth on edge. The fog thickened and began to roil. Dewey's wand twitched in his hand. He was ready, but before he could react, a dark figure surged from the mist and struck at his back with blinding speed. The attacker hit the shield charm with a thunderous clang and rebounded. Dewey turned and saw it clearly for the first time. Tall, clad in ragged, decayed armor, eyes burning with a sickly light, skin pulled tight over bone, the unmistakable shape of a barrow wight. Dewey flinched. The wight had been too fast. If he hadn't put the shield charm up in advance, the ambush might have succeeded. The first attack failed, but the wight came at him again. This time, Dewey struck first. He raised his wand and cast Petrificus Totalis. The spell struck home. The wight froze, rigid as carved stone. Dewey didn't relax. He sent two small cleavers, blades he controlled with magic, sweeping at the wight's neck. Sparks flew on impact, but the blades did not bite cleanly. Dewey's breath stuttered. He had heard from Tom that wights were hard to destroy, but he hadn't expected them to take punishment like this. The cleavers hacked and hacked. At last they opened a wound that exposed black, putrefying flesh and bleached bone. Before he could rejoice, a black mist welled from the cut, and the flesh knit itself shut at an eerie speed. The previously petrified wight stiffened where it stood, and then, as if sensing a chance, slipped back into the mist and vanished. Dewey cursed under his breath. He was starting to get used to the Old Man Willow's resistance to magic, but this, he had no idea wights could shrug off Petrificus so quickly. He glanced at his watch. Only 4 or 5 minutes had passed since he'd bound the thing. If it could break free that fast, this mission would be harder than he'd thought. He stayed alert. The fog seemed to watch him. He felt eyes on his back, waiting for a lapse. The wight reemerged, now brandishing a greatsword. It moved so quickly it was almost a blur, charging to within arm's length and raining the blade down on Dewey's shield charm. Black mist drifted from the sword. To Dewey's horror, it cut clean through his protective shell. For a heartbeat, the wight seemed to savor its victory, a twisted triumph in its face. Then it slammed into another invisible barrier and was repelled. Dewey hammered into it with a fusillade of spells. Impedimenta, Petrificus Totalis, Expelliarmus. Impedimenta slowed the wight to a crawl. Petrificus froze it in place. Expelliarmus ripped the cursed greatsword from its grasp. This time, Dewey would not let it escape. He layered the shackles, a half-dozen Petrificus Totalis spells, then a leg-locker curse. The barrage bound the wight so utterly that it would not move for at least an hour. Dewey didn't finish it yet. He stepped forward and studied the greatsword he'd just expelled. The blade pulsed with black fog and a palpable sense of wrongness. Some deep curse lay in the metal. He dared not touch it bare-handed. If ordinary weapons couldn't truly slay a wight, perhaps a weapon steeped in that same malice could. An idea sparked. He sent the greatsword to fly by magic. The blade hummed with black air as it hovered, and then, guided by Dewey's will, it shifted into a shadowy shape and drove through the paralyzed wight, carving a wide hole through its chest. Dark vapor that had clung to the creature thinned noticeably. Dewey stabbed again and again. With each strike, the wight's fell presence faded. Its gray, leathery skin slowed and rotted away. The final blow severed its head clean from its shoulders. The wight let out a last unwilling roar. A dense black mist shot skyward, burst, and dissolved into nothing. The flesh collapsed. Where the corpse had stood there remained only a scatter of white bones. Dewey let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and stared at the bones for a long moment, heart still racing, the barrow-down silence closing in around him once more. Chapter 23. Barrow Wight. After dealing with the animated corpse, Dewey let out a long breath. The encounter had put him on edge. The disturbance would almost certainly wake other barrow wights in the ancient tombs. He needed to move fast. Following the map Tom had given him, Dewey hurried through the misty grave field, eyes fixed on the rotten headstones. The inscriptions were long gone, corroded by time, but the map marked one place, the tomb of the last prince of Cardolan, the prince who fell defending his kingdom against the Witch King of Angmar and was buried in the Barrow Downs. Tom had said that the prince's tomb held the sharp tools Dewey was looking for. Before Dewey could find the tomb, the Hogwarts Sign-in System reacted. Hogwarts Sign-in System, location, Barrow Downs. Do you wish to sign in? Sign in, he answered. Sign in successful, reward obtained, dark arts manual, curses and countercurses. A book materialized, its cover a pained, ferocious human face. Dewey blinked. He hadn't expected a dark arts manual, but there was no time to inspect it. The mist thickened and the ground cracked. More barrow wights were surfacing. Dewey muttered a string of protective charms and gripped his wand. At his side, the ancient barrow blades he had summoned hovered, ready to strike. The fog heaved, and a chill wind announced the first attacker. A skeletal figure lunged, only to be stalled by Dewey's barrier. Before it hit the earth, he hit it with Petrificus Totalis. It froze mid-motion. No sooner had he cast it than 3 more wights burst from the fog, each hefting a cursed greatsword. They closed in with lethal speed. A single blow shattered one of his barriers and drove onward. Petrificus Totalis! Petrificus Totalis! Petrificus Totalis! Dewey fired the spell in rapid succession. This time the wights were smarter. One of them locked into the spell and froze, but the other 2 ducked and dodged. An afterimage of one of Dewey's floating barrow blades flashed through the air and pierced a wight's torso. Its limbs went rigid. Dewey's next spell knocked the greatsword from its grasp. The remaining wight had no time. Disarmed, it was surrounded by the flying blades. 3 greatswords became a cage of steel and impaled it, ending it like the others. Dewey cast Petrificus Totalis on the downed forms to make sure they stayed motionless, then did the same to the first corpse to be safe. He detached their cursed swords and used the blades themselves to finish the creatures, delivering blow after blow that reduced their remaining life force. Black energy spouted into the air in several bursts as each wight finally crumbled into brittle white bones. He had meant to clear the area quickly, but the fallen creatures bore jewelry and burial trinkets. Curses clung to the ornaments as surely as to the swords, so Dewey wrapped them in old cloths rather than touch them with his hands. Satisfied the curses were contained, he kept moving. At last he stopped before a tall white marble tomb. The scale and grandeur marked it as belonging to someone noble. The map had been right. The entrance was partly collapsed, blocked by loose stones. Dewey pushed them aside and revealed a dark passage. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself, then shrugged and stepped inside. The corridor was tall enough to walk upright. He sent a Lumos charm forward, its bright ball of light bobbing ahead and banishing the gloom. The floating barrow blades circled him like silent guardians. The passage twisted on until it opened into a spacious burial chamber. In the center stood a stone sarcophagus and nothing else. Odd, Dewey had expected more resistance after the commotion outside. He remained tense. If anything was hiding, it would be in that sarcophagus. "Wingardium Leviosa," he whispered. The lid trembled and slid aside. Anticipating an ambush, Dewey drove Petrificus Totalis into the opening before the lid was fully clear. Confident the interior could not move, he pushed the lid fully away. Lumos spilled over the chamber and revealed the occupant. The corpse inside was horribly preserved, skin shrunken and clinging to bone, eyes black and cold with a faint, malevolent light. A jeweled silver crown sat on its brow. A heavy, cold greatsword lay across its chest, and funeral jewelry hung from its brittle fingers. Even inert, it wore the trappings of royalty. Dewey felt a pang of pity. This had to be the last prince of Cardolan, turned into a barrow wight by the Witch King. "No peace even in death," he said softly. "I'll do you a favor." He disarmed himself and summoned all 5 hovering barrow blades into a coordinated assault, the metal whirling like 1,000 points aimed at the heart. But the wight was not spent. Dark power flared from its chest and shattered the restraints. The creature's eyes flamed red. A cold, oppressive force washed over Dewey, bringing waves of fear and despair so strong they clawed at his lungs. He felt the room tilt and heard, as if from the depths of a tomb, "Who are you? How dare you slay a servant of the great Witch King?" The ancient swords wavered at his side. Dewey bit down on his tongue until sharp pain tore through his mouth. He'd read once that sudden pain could snap the mind out of supernatural despair. It worked. For a heartbeat, he felt the fog of dread thin. He seized the moment and raised his wand in a flowing, almost musical motion. Golden notes sprang from the tip, bright as sunlit bells. The charm's cheerful sound chased back the wight's malignancy, washing the burial chamber in warmth that pushed the blackness away. The wight faltered, stunned. Dewey struck. Petrificus Totalis. Bright white light slammed into the creature and froze it again. Without a pause, the 5 barrow blades dove in, piercing through skull and crown. The wight's red eyes flashed an unreadable emotion: anger, sorrow, recognition, then dulled. In a dry voice that seemed dragged from a grave, it whispered, "I will remember you." wizard. The malignant aura drained from its bones. The body rotted in an instant into a pile of white fragments. Dewey stood in the hushed chamber, the echo of those last words hanging in the air, and felt more than a little hollowed by the victory. He gathered the prince's sword and the remaining trinkets, carefully wrapped, and prepared to leave the tomb behind. Chapter 24. Curse and Counter-Curse. Dewey gave the Barrow Wight's last threat little thought. Anyone could make threats, and he had long suspected that the force behind this wight was the Witch King of Angmar, chief of Sauron's ringwraiths. Being on the Witch King's radar didn't worry him. He couldn't present himself before such a figure on a whim anyway. He dealt with the immediate problem, and it was time to take the spoils. He gathered every jeweled ornament and the crown the Barrow Wight had possessed. At the creature's feet, he found 4 daggers, strange, unknown metal that showed no trace of rust after 1,000 years. They gleamed silver and gave off a cold, cutting look. On impulse, Dewey took one and sliced at the corner of the stone coffin. The blade slid through the stone as if it were tofu. The corner came away with a single sweep. He grinned. These were exactly the sort of tools he needed for carving tree hearts. As he looked from the 4 daggers to the burial chamber, a thought struck him. In the future, the 4 hobbits from the Lord of the Rings, after leaving Tom's house, had also fallen into a barrow and were saved at the last moment. Tom gave them 4 daggers he had taken from a barrow. Had Dewey just taken their opportunity early? He could have worried about fate or timelines, but he didn't care. What lay in his hands now was his. He was about to leave when he stepped out and almost choked. Hundreds of Barrow Wights pressed in the gloom, and the moment they smelled a living thing, they surged forward. Dewey was sure the Witch King had woken them to trap anyone in the Barrow Downs. The Wights were bait or jailers. He didn't want to be trapped. Lumos. A concentrated ball of light burst from his wand tip, brilliant enough to flood the Barrow Downs. The Wights recoiled. They could not tolerate light. It wasn't as deadly as sunlight, but it slowed them. Dewey shielded himself with a protective charm and animated several of the ancient Barrow swords, using them to cut a path through the pressing gloom. He pushed for the north and kept moving. The Wights shadowed him, unwilling to let the prize escape, but the farther he went from the barrows, the weaker their dark hold became. By day's end, they could only roar their frustration as he walked away. After hours, he reached the great east-west road that runs north of the Barrow Downs, the main artery of Eriador. East led toward Bree. West would take him through the Old Forest, across Buckland and the Brandywine Bridge, and toward the Shire. He glanced east and then went west. He wasn't headed to Bree just yet. Before anything else, he needed to expose what he'd taken to the sun. On the roadside, he spread the 5 long barrow swords, the 4 daggers, and the trinkets from his pack in a neat row, and let the sunlight wash over them. The curses and gloom tied to the items unfurled into thin black smoke and vanished under the sun's cleansing. The daggers showed no change, still sharp, still silver. The jewelry seemed to brighten, cleansed of some foul taint. The swords, however, were ruined. Once the dark enchantments had been burned out, the blades fell into disrepair and lost whatever anti-magic properties they had once possessed. Dewey packed everything away and set out again. It had been over half a year since he transmigrated to Middle-earth. He planned to go back to Hobbiton for a visit. He wanted to rest where he had first arrived, and there was still the large bag of pipeweed he'd bought for Bill that hadn't been delivered. More pressingly, the dwarves' expedition to the Lonely Mountain was coming up. It would be January, 3rd age 2941, the year Bill joined that venture. If Dewey didn't want to miss it, he had to find Bill before then. As he walked, he called up the strange magic book he had received for checking in at the barrow. The cover was carved with a distorted, suffering human face that made him frown. This was a book of the dark arts, just by looks alone. He opened it and read. The book was titled Curses and Counter-Curses, and it detailed a branch of magic that was malicious and stubborn, cursecraft. Curses, it warned, were among the foulest arts. They might not act as explosively as other magics, but they were often irreversible and terrible. The book even referenced famous curses of his own world, how a certain dark wizard's spite had blighted the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, so that every professor appointed to it suffered disaster within a year, and how some curses were bloodbound, passed down a family line until their victims slowly lost their humanity and became something animal and mindless. These maledictions could not be undone by ordinary means. Practical methods filled the pages, making a voodoo doll by incorporating a target's personal item, binding curses to names, portraits, or keepsakes to sap the victim's strength or haunt them with fatal nightmares, cursing objects so that anyone who touched them suffered long, painful deaths. The power and severity of a curse depended on the caster's malice and magical strength. Once laid, curses were nearly impossible to lift. No wonder, the book said, that such magic was strictly forbidden, punishable by lifetime imprisonment in Azkaban in Dewey's own world. The illustrations were gruesome. Dewey closed the book and took a deep breath. He felt momentary physical revulsion at the bloody diagrams. Some rites demanded blood or even a human life to succeed, yet he did not think himself frightened off. If nothing else, he wanted to know. In his view, he might never choose to use curses, but he had to understand them. In a pinch, such knowledge could be a last resort. He lingered longest over the voodoo doll section. A doll could be made to share or transfer harm, to afflict a target from afar, even under the right conditions, to set someone obsessively in love. If he had such a thing when the Witch King had warned him in the barrow, Dewey imagined he could have struck back without meeting him face to face. Would a curse even work against a ringwraith? He wondered. The Witch King was no longer fully alive. Would the rites bind to him at all? Another problem nagged him: the raw materials. The book called for ingredients he knew from his old world, the mandrake root among them. Where, he wondered, in Middle-earth would one find mandrakes? Chapter 25. Back to Buckland. Mandrakes in the magical world were nothing like ordinary plants. They were alive. Their roots resembled small human figures, and when pulled from the earth, they let out a baby's cry so potent it could kill. In the mundane world, there are plants sometimes called mandrakes, deadly nightshade, love apples, but they do not shriek. They are simply poisonous herbs. Duir wondered, though, whether herbology techniques could be used to turn an ordinary mandrake into a magical one. He had already managed to cultivate 2 white fresh plants and brew Baishan elixir. Perhaps mandrake could be coaxed into magic as well. If he could grow magical mandrakes, he could make voodoo dolls and, more importantly, gain a supply of a rare ingredient used in advanced potions, something that would be invaluable for his future potion making. Now that he had a wand, Duir had begun to think seriously about potions. He had picked up a copy of Magical Drafts and Potions when he signed in at Bywater, but potions required not only rare herbs but a wand and a cauldron, so he had set the subject aside for the moment. Even so, potions were one of the most essential disciplines at Hogwarts. They could heal wounds and cure magical ailments when spells could not, and they produced extraordinary effects. Polyjuice for changing one's appearance, Felix Felicis for luck, draughts that could restore the dead, or even the elixir of life. Duir knew he would be facing more dangerous things in the future than the Guzhong corpse demon, so potions felt like a necessity. Besides finding mandrake, he would need to gather many potion ingredients and acquire a proper cauldron. Following the east-west road, Duir passed the old forest and reached Brandy Hall. He turned south toward Buckland. His carriage was still at Juoguo's house, and he wanted to see if Rory Brandybuck, as lord of the area, could help him gather some of the materials he needed. He walked on to Juoguo's doorstep in Bucklebury and knocked. The door opened, and Juoguo peered out, half surprised, half delighted. "Duir, you're back. It's only been a month," Duir said with a grin. "I'm glad to see you well." Juoguo blinked as he took Duir in, his new clothes the cloak, and his eyes widened. "Wow, Duir, you look like a wizard now." Duir accepted the compliment with a smile. The robe Goldberry had made fit him perfectly, sturdy, warm, comfortable. More important was the blessing woven into the cloak, the subtle kind of magic that made passers-by unconsciously overlook him unless he wished otherwise. As the man who had driven the horns out of the old forest, Duir was known throughout Buckland, and yet when he had first come into town, not a single hobbit had noticed him. The cloak was almost like a poor man's invisibility cloak. It didn't make him invisible to someone of strong will or great power, but most folks simply paid him no mind. He was grateful to Goldberry for it. Duir stayed at Zhuoguo's house, and under his friend's eager gaze, recounted his recent adventures. When he mentioned the Barrow Downs and the Guzhong corpse demon, Zhuoguo gasped. Even though the Barrow Downs were far from Buckland, tales of them reached every corner of the Shire, and the name Guzhong corpse demon made hobbit faces go pale. No one expected Duir to have gone so deep into the Barrows alone and come back alive, and the story deepened Zhuoguo's respect for his friend. "Are these really all from the Barrow Downs?" Zhuoguo asked, eyes shining as Duir spread out his spoils. 5 ancient swords from the Barrows, 4 finely made daggers, and a glittering pile of jewelry and accessories. Duir pushed the jewelry toward him. "Take something you like as a souvenir." The heavy Barrow swords weren't suitable hobbit gifts. Duir himself could barely lift them, so he didn't offer them. The 4 daggers, however, were another matter. Forged by the northern Dunedain during their wars with Angmar, they were feathered, razor-sharp, and etched with runes that could pierce and counter the Witch King's magic. They were wards against Nazgul and other dark things. Duir had no intention of parting with such weapons. They would serve him well as tools for shaping wandwood and would replace his 2 old cleavers. Until he learned powerful offensive magic, throwing and controlling knives with spells had been his best method of attack. These daggers would make that tactic far more potent. With no hesitation, he discarded the cleavers. Zhuoguo was flattered by the offer of the jewelry and kept refusing until Duir insisted. At last, he accepted a sapphire-studded brooch, cradling it with the kind of awe a hobbit reserves for precious baubles. After a brief rest, Duir and Zhuoguo went on to Brandy Hall. Rory Brandybuck greeted them like old friends, bursting with enthusiasm. "Welcome back, Duir. Welcome, our wizard hero, Duir the Tree Cutter. Ever since you left for Tom's house in the Old Forest, there's been no word, and I worried myself sick. To see you return safe, it's a great relief." Duir's mouth twitched at the epithet. People in Middle-earth love to add honorifics for great deeds, Thorin Oakenshield, for instance, but Tree Cutter sounded oddly blunt. Surely he could have had something grander. Bane of the Huorns, or Enemy of the Old Forest, would have sounded better than a name that made him sound like a gardener. Chapter 26. The Strongest Wand. He grumbled inwardly about the formalities, but since he was the one asking for help, he couldn't take offense. So Dewey forced a smile and made pleasant conversation with the head of the Brandybuck family. When Rory Brandybuck learned that Dewey had been to the Barrow Downs, fought wights, and brought back spoils from that grim place, his admiration and respect grew. After some more talk, Dewey presented his purpose. A list of materials he needed collected, and an offer to pay with the jewels he'd taken from the wights. Rory agreed at once, but as soon as he read the list carefully, his expression changed from eager to bemused. The first items were ordinary enough: mugwort, lavender, daffodil root, daisy root, fig skin, but the rest were anything but: caterpillars, slugs, leech juice, beetle eyes, rat spleens and tails, snake skin and fangs. Rory blinked, reread it, and then stared. Wizard Dewey. He stammered, "Are you sure this list is right? These things." He trailed off. Dewey tilted his head. "Are they hard to find?" "I know some of them won't be easy," Rory admitted, "but I mean, what do you need them for? If it's a secret, you don't have to tell me." Dewey smiled. "There's nothing to hide. I'm making potions. These are common potion ingredients." Rory's astonishment doubled. He remembered when Dewey had treated his daughter Dora. Zhuoguo had used Dewey's Baishan elixir to heal a scratch she got while walking in the wilds, and Rory had seen the wound vanish almost instantly. That miracle had convinced him to favor Zhuoguo for his daughter's hand. He had never imagined such curative magic could be brewed from a list like this. Still, his offer stood. "If you need them, we'll do our best," he said, all curiosity put aside for duty. Dewey accepted the help gratefully, but he wouldn't impose charity. He paid Rory with the white jewels, and Rory left satisfied and more convinced than ever that he was dealing with someone remarkable. After leaving Brandy Hall, Dewey went to the smithy and commissioned a crucible to a specification of his own. The smith would make it from a silver alloy known for conducting magic well. Then he walked to Zhuoguo's house and took out the strip of heartwood Tom had cut for him earlier. It was the perfect size for a wand. Dewey drew a dagger and began to carve. The heartwood, though said to be as hard as iron, cut like soft wax under the edge. He laughed aloud at how effortless it felt and at the craftsmanship of the blade. Dunedain work, he thought, plainly deserving of being called divine. He had 4 such daggers, and each was a treasure. He took his time shaping the wand, working carefully and with patience. A week passed in the gentle rhythm of scraping and sanding, and the wand's form finally emerged. The core channel required precision beyond his skill with a knife, so he had a hobbit craftsman drill the hole to depth with a diamond bit. When everything fit, Dewey broke his first wand and extracted its core. He slid that core into the heartwood, then poured the resinous sap he'd collected from the old willow tree into the seam. The sap acted like glue, fusing wood and core into one. After a final polishing, he set the wand aside to wait for the right night. On the full moon, he stepped outside and held the wand up into the silvered light. He moved it in deliberate patterns and began a long, measured chant, Runix inscribere spiritus olari resonantia. As he spoke the syllables, the moonlight seemed to thicken, drawing itself into the wand as if it were thirsty. A cold, silvery mist gathered and flowed into the wood. The wand stilled and then seemed to breathe. A faint thrumming of magic sifted through it like a heartbeat. Dewey felt the wand settle against his arm so naturally that it felt less like a tool and more like a limb. When he released a pulse of his own power through it, the effect was immediate and astonishing. With a sharp, joyous crack, countless golden notes burst from the wand's tip, musical shapes, alive and dancing. They unfurled into the air and, carried by the night breeze, rolled outward across the fields and into the lanes of Buckland. Every ear that heard them found its burdens lightened, faces that had been set softened, and smiles bloomed. Even Dewey felt the enchantment nudge at his heart, partly from the spell, partly from the pride of what the wand had made possible. The wand was called a heartwood wand for good reason. The staff was hewn from the heartwood of the old willow in the old forest, an ancient, powerful tree, and its core was no ordinary sliver of magic. Dewey had bound together the hair of Goldberry, the river daughter, with the beard of Tom Bombadil. Such rare components, joined to the old willow's very heart, made the instrument extraordinary. It suited him perfectly and magnified his power. Spells cast through it were far stronger than those he could produce unaided. Where his old willow wand might have carried the musical charm a few dozen meters, the heartwood wand spread its music over the whole of Buckland. The difference, Dewey discovered with childlike delight, was immense. He spent the rest of the night trying the wand, sending small charms and shifting the patterns of his voice to see how it responded. Each experiment revealed more of the wand's character, and each success made him happier. Only after he felt he and the wand were properly acquainted did he turn his mind back to the list of potion ingredients waiting in Brandy Hall. Chapter 27. Goodbye, Bilbo. With the full backing of the Brandybucks and the financial support of Dewey's jewelry business, the inhabitants of the entire Xionglu district were mobilized, and collection of potion ingredients proceeded with surprising efficiency. Bundles of mugwort, lavender, daffodil root, and daisy root arrived by the cartload, while basins of leeches, jars of slugs and caterpillars, sacks of rat tails and spleens were left at Zhuoguo's doorstep. Dewey was pleased with the yield, but he was overwhelmed. Some ingredients had to be dried, others had to be kept fresh. He recruited Zhuoguo to help process everything. Zhuoguo's face went pale when he saw the basin of slimy slugs. "Duir, are you sure these are for potion making and not poison?" he asked, trying not to touch them. "Of course," Dewey said with a confident grin. "Once I make the potion, I'll give you a bottle. It'll work the moment you drink it." He smirked, knowing full well he didn't relish handling the slugs either, and mischievously handed the basin to Zhuoguo, who didn't know how to refuse. The promise of having to drink the potion made Zhuoguo balk. Never mind. I hardly ever get sick anyway." Still, with a pale face, he braced himself, picked up a slug, and snipped off its pair of antennae, the actual ingredient needed for the brew. Dewey was equally busy with a basin of caterpillars. Wearing deerskin gloves to avoid their stings, he slit each one open, scooped out the filthy intestines, washed the insides clean, and spread them on a stone slab to dry. Even with the aid of magic, the two of them spent a week processing the ingredients. Dewey's back ached and his muscles throbbed by the end of it. Along with the raw ingredients, Dewey had received 4 potted plants, 2 of white fresh and 2 of a deadly nightshade that resembled small mandrakes. He intended to use the white fresh for a Baishian elixir and hoped to cultivate the nightshade into something like the mandrakes of the magical world. The 2 nightshade plants had been dug up on the outskirts of the old forest, their roots already curled into little humanoid shapes. Every day, Dewey fed all 4 pots with magic. The white fresh showed obvious changes. The nightshades hardly changed, but they drank Dewey's magic greedily. That wasn't discouraging. Being able to absorb magic was a good sign. And now that his magical reserves had doubled, he no longer worried about running out. When the collections were finally in order, Dewey didn't start brewing at once. Instead, he loaded everything onto his carriage, packed his own belongings, and formally said goodbye to Zhuo Guo and Rory Brandybuck. He had to hurry back to Hobbiton. He couldn't recall the exact date of the expedition to the Lonely Mountain, and if he intended to join, he couldn't delay. After a reluctant farewell, he drove away. Hobbiton was its usual peaceful self. Bilbo had just finished lunch and sat in front of his garden, leisurely smoking his pipe, gazing off into the distance. Since Dewey left, life had returned to its quiet routine, but the longer he waited, the more restless Bilbo became, thinking of Dewey's travels and sometimes wishing he had gone along. Just as he stubbed out his pipe and prepared for afternoon tea, a carriage appeared down the lane. Dewey jumped down as the carriage drew up and waved with a broad smile. "Long time no see, my friend? Did you miss me?" "Duir?" Bilbo laughed, rushing out of the garden to hug Dewey's leg. "Why are you back? What? Am I not welcome?" Dewey teased. Bilbo pretended to be affronted, then said very earnestly, "How could you say that? You are always welcome here." And he insisted Dewey come in for tea. Dewey leaned against his loaded carriage. "I'll be in a minute. I need to unload first." "Oh," he added, snapping his fingers as a large bag drifted out and landed in front of Bilbo. "I brought a bag of your favorite long-bottom leaf." Bilbo's eyes lit up. Long-bottom leaf was his favorite tobacco. He beamed and immediately wanted to help carry things in. Dewey refused the offer with a laugh. "No, my friend. You don't have to do anything. Just give me a place to put them." With a few more snaps, the items floated from the carriage into bag end. Jars, bundles, potted plants, and the odd leathery sheets of snakeskin that made Bilbo swallow hard. He had always been a bit timid about snakes. When Bilbo saw the jars of leeches, the slimy slugs, and the rows of dried caterpillars, his expression turned from curiosity to alarm. "Duir, what exactly are you going to do with these things?" "To make potion." Dewey shrugged. "You'll see." After stacking everything away in a cleared storeroom, Dewey took from his pack some jewelry and trinkets, ancient, valuable pieces he had recovered from the Guzhong corpse demon. He disliked keeping items taken from the dead, so he was happy to give them away, especially to a friend who had helped him. Bilbo was embarrassed to accept such treasure, but Dewey urged him on until Bilbo at last chose a small ruby brooch, humble by Dewey's standards perhaps, but precious to Bilbo. It was a funny coincidence. He and Zhuo Guo had picked the same kind of item. Tea followed, and Bilbo chattered eagerly about village life and Dewey's recent deeds. From Bilbo, Dewey learned how news of his repelling of the invading Ents in the Xionglu district had spread across the Shire. The Brandybucks had made quite a point of promoting the story, and before long, people were calling him Tree Feller. Dewey winced at the lumberjack-sounding title, but he could do nothing about it. What surprised him even more was how far the name had traveled. Word hadn't stopped at the borders of the Shire. Merchants, rangers, dwarves, and other travelers who'd stopped at the Prancing Pony in Bree had carried the tale onward. It seemed his small act had rippled far beyond the hedgerows of Hobbiton. Chapter 28, Brewing Potions. After finishing afternoon tea, Dewey didn't rush straight into potion making. He pulled a magic book from his satchel. The cover read Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. When he had returned to Hobbiton from Bree, he had not taken the direct east road. Instead, he had detoured north to stop at Hardbottle and Longbottom in the North Farthing. Checking in at Longbottom earned him a copy of History of Magic. At Hardbottle, he had picked up Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. History of Magic was pleasant reading, but of little practical use, more pastime than instruction. The Transfiguration book, however, was exactly what he needed. It was the first and second year textbook from Hogwarts and covered the basics, transforming everyday items, useful summoning incantations like Aguamenti and Orchideus, and vanishing spells. Transfiguration was not the same as charms. Charms depended largely on belief and raw magical power. Transfiguration demanded imagination and precise control, a subtle art that taxed both mind and mana. The beginner lessons dealt with changing inanimate objects into other inanimate objects and vice versa. Later stages introduced animals and, at the highest level, human transfiguration and the rare animagus craft. For Dewey, thirsty for knowledge, even the basics were a godsend. With his wand to steady him, he found the simplest transfigurations fairly straightforward. He turned a matchstick into a needle on his first try. Encouraged, he pointed his wand at the small bed in the guest room. Faraverto. The little wooden bed lengthened and widened until it was a proper 2-meter bed. The rough blankets became soft velvet and smooth silk. Dewey grinned. No more worrying about his feet dangling off the edge. He turned to Bilbo, who had been watching with wide eyes. "Do you want me to transfigure your bedding too?" "Yes!" Bilbo snapped back from his daydream, then nodded eagerly, his eyes shining. It was more astonishing than anything he had seen before. A few days after mastering those basic transfigurations, Dewey began preparing for potions. Potion class was unlike any other subject. Professor Snape had put it best. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making. As there is little foolish wand-waving here, many of you will hardly believe this is magic. I can teach you how to bottle fame, brew glory, even stopper death, if you're not complete dunderheads. Dewey wasn't sure whether Snape would have labeled him a dunderhead, but he understood the importance of potions. Potions solved problems that spells sometimes could not, healing injuries that would otherwise be fatal, disguising a person's identity with a polyjuice potion, forcing truth with Veritaserum, tempting luck with Felix Felicis, even prolonging life with the elixir of life. The trouble was that many standard potion ingredients didn't exist in Middle-earth. Substitutes would be needed, and making those substitutions reliably was the work of a potion master. That was a problem for the future. For now, he wanted to learn the basics. He had the textbook Magical Drafts and Potions, which contained simple recipes whose ingredients were available in his new world. For his first proper attempt, Dewey chose the simplest potion in the book, a potion for boils. In the storeroom, he set a silver cauldron over a kerosene lamp, preheating it for a minute. He placed 6 snake fangs into a mortar and ground them to a fine powder. When the cauldron was hot, he poured the powder in and stirred until the liquid came to a boil. A flick of his wand magnified the lamp's flame into a great blaze for 10 seconds. Then he steadied it to a medium heat and added 4 slugs for steaming. He followed the book to the letter. When the brew boiled and began to steam, he doused the flame and let the cauldron sit. Then he dropped in 2 porcupine quills and stirred 5 times clockwise with his wand. As he moved, a steady current of magic ran from wand into liquid. The potion shifted color, settling into a clear blue, while the rising smoke turned a soft pink. At that sign, the potion for boils was finished. He transfigured a crystal bottle and carefully poured the blue liquid inside. Bilbo, who had stood by in near silence the whole time, finally broke in. "Is it done?" he asked, more astonished than curious. Dewey smiled and handed him the bottle. "Of course, this will cure boils. You can try it on someone who needs it." The potion for boils had a single, simple purpose. Dewey had used it as practice, so he didn't hesitate to give Bilbo the first batch. Then, eager to perfect the process, he set up to make another. This time he wasn't fussy about equipment. Bilbo had an old iron pot, so beat up it served better as scrap than cookware. Dewey thought it a good test. If the potion worked in an imperfect vessel, he'd have confidence in his method. He repeated the steps exactly until he reached the moment to add the porcupine quills. In his impatience, perhaps inexperience, he did not douse the flame first. Instead, he grabbed the quills and threw them straight into the fierce, rolling boil. The reaction was instant. A sharp green smoke erupted and stung the eyes. There was a loud hiss as the liquid reacted violently, churning and foaming. The The corrosive brew clawed at the iron, eating through the bottom of the pot in seconds. Hot green liquid splashed and hissed onto the stone floor and up the walls, and a smell like burned metal and rotten meat filled the room. Chapter 29, Shrinking Potion. Protego. Dew was ready. The moment he tossed in the porcupine quills, he cast a protective barrier over the cauldron, enclosing the liquid so it wouldn't splash. When the brew finally calmed, he produced a glass bottle with a flick of his wand and levitated the highly corrosive liquid into it. He glanced back at the iron cauldron. It was perforated through and through, rendered useless. No mending charm could restore it. He wasn't surprised. He was pleased. The potion book had warned that when making the potion for boils, you must extinguish the fire before adding porcupine quills. Otherwise, the mixture would dissolve the cauldron and turn into a powerful corrosive. The failed boils potion couldn't be used on people, but its corrosiveness was frightening, far stronger than sulfuric acid. As a weapon against enemies, it would be horrendous. Bilbo, who had watched the whole scene, eyed the green liquid in the bottle with awe and kept his distance, not daring to get close for fear a single drop might be fatal. Once he'd finished both versions, the successful and the ruined, of the potion for boils, Dewey set about a new brew, the shrinking potion. It turned creatures smaller or reverted them to a younger state. In potion lore, it usually appeared as a bright green, acidic-looking liquid. It could be used against large monsters that resisted magic, or to shrink livestock for easy transport, whole herds folded into a wizard's pocket. If a wizard drank it himself, he would rapidly shrink. The stronger the potion, the smaller the person. Unscrupulous wizards sometimes used it to shrink themselves and slip into others' houses or vaults. The ingredients weren't terribly exotic. Shrivel fig, daisy roots, caterpillars, wormwood, leeches, a rat spleen, and valerian sprigs. Valerian sprigs had to be extracted from the root. Dewey already had the rest. He set out a silver cauldron and chopped the valerian, grinding it to powder in a mortar. He added the powder to the cauldron and simmered, stirring with his wand and carefully regulating the heat so the valerian's essence dissolved into the solvent. "Finite incantum," he murmured, and the liquid and powdered residue separated automatically. He filtered off the residue and cleaned it away, leaving only the potion to continue boiling until it reduced to a grayish-white paste on the bottom. That paste was the concentrated valerian sprig used in many potions. Now with the valerian ready, he began the full shrinking potion. It was a second-year assignment in potion making, more complicated than the potion for boils, requiring the ingredients to be added one by one and more patience and attention. He first squeezed the shrivel fig, keeping the peel and pulp, and added the juice to the cauldron to simmer on low for 20 minutes. Then he added the daisy roots and the caterpillars and let the mixture boil. The liquid turned dark green. After reducing it to half its volume, he put out the fire and let it cool for 30 minutes. When it had cooled, he added 24 drops of wormwood infusion, 1 drop at a time, and after each drop stirred the potion with his wand in alternating directions. Before adding the last drop, he stirred so vigorously the surface foamed completely. Then he stopped. The brew had to sit for 24 hours while the foam settled and disappeared. At the same hour, the next day, he reheated the potion and added leech juice, stirring slowly and carefully. The color began to pale. Once it had become a pale green, he added the rat spleen and the valerian paste, then turned up the heat and kept it boiling hard for 2 hours. When the time was up, the mixture had become a bright green, thick, syrupy liquid. Dewey leaned over the cauldron, comparing the color and consistency to the book's description. "This should be a success, right?" he murmured, uncertain. He needed to test it. He dipped his wand and took a single drop from the cauldron, letting it fall onto a carrot. Bilbo, curious, followed when Dewey took the carrot outside Bag End. Nearby, a pony was grazing. Dewey waved the carrot and called, "Hey, little dummy, look here." Little Dummy, a pony given to Dewey by the head of the Took family back in Tuckborough, had always been a bit clumsy, hence the name. Since they'd returned to Hobbiton, Bilbo had looked after him most of the time and even built him a simple stable. Seeing the carrot, Little Dummy's eyes brightened. He abandoned the mouthful of grass and trotted over eagerly, taking the carrot in his teeth and beginning to chew. Bilbo didn't have time to stop him. He looked at Dewey with a worried glare, literally scolding the irresponsible owner for testing a potion on the pony. Dewey rubbed his nose. There were only 3 living beings present. Was he supposed to test it on himself or Bilbo instead? Besides, he was confident it wouldn't kill the pony. As little dummy ate the carrot with the single drop of shrinking potion, his body began to change in under 2 seconds. "Nay! Nay!" the pony bleated, suddenly alarmed. To little dummy, everything, his masters, the trees, the ground, towered gigantic. From Dewey and Bilbo's perspective, the pony was visibly shrinking until he was the size of a palm, a living miniature figurine. Dewey scooped him up, watching the tiny horse flop his 4 tiny legs in his hand. A rare grin crossed his face. "Looks like the potion works well. 1 drop does this, a few more drops, and he'd be even smaller." Bilbo could only stare, too stunned to speak. He had seen Dewey's magic before, but this was miraculous. Dewey handed the tiny pony to him. Bilbo cupped little dummy gently, feeling his weight and warmth, and realized he wasn't dreaming. Duir," he stammered, looking up at Dewey. "Will little dummy stay like this forever?" Dewey shook his head. "Of course not. Once the potion wears off, he'll return to normal. Just be careful. Don't stand on him when he pops back to full size." Bilbo hurriedly set little dummy down. He had no wish to be crushed by a full-grown pony. After about 15 minutes, the effect wore off. Little dummy swelled back to his usual size in a rush and shook himself as if nothing unusual had happened. Dewey came inside, feeling pleased. He had finished testing the shrinking potion, bottled the remainder, and put it away. The shrinking potion was as useful as he'd hoped. It could reduce the size of large beasts until they were harmless, or be taken by people who wanted to shrink themselves and hide. After that success, he didn't stop. Over the next few days, he brewed a forgetfulness potion, a calming potion, and a sleeping potion. He also used 2 pots of mature white fresh to make more Baishan elixir, the miraculous remedy that healed wounds. He never felt he had enough of that elixir. By contrast, his 2 pots of deadly nightshade seemed stubbornly unchanged. Every day he watered them with magic, but the plants simply soaked it up and did not transform into anything unusual. He worried they might never become what herbology texts promised, but he refused to give up. He kept caring for them, checking them regularly. Early spring arrived in the Shire. Nearly a year had passed since Dewey had come to Middle-earth. One afternoon, absorbed in a book on curses and counter-curses, he was interrupted by an anxious knock. Bilbo stood in the doorway, looking unsettled. "Bilbo, what's wrong?" Dewey closed the book and looked up. Bilbo hesitated, then blurted out, "Duir, I think Bag End is haunted." "Haunted?" Dewey blinked, trying to see whether Bilbo was joking. But Bilbo's face was serious. "These last few days, while I've been fixing the garden, I keep hearing crying. It sounds like a baby, so faint but eerie. It's horrible." "A baby?" Dewey frowned, and then a thought struck him. He hurried into the front yard and Bilbo followed, curious. Dewey went straight to the 2 pots of deadly nightshade. He'd been tending them with magic, but had hardly examined them lately. Up close, the plants looked like nothing more than slightly taller stems and leaves. Still, Dewey wasn't satisfied. He pressed his wand into the soil and gently moved the earth away from the roots. Buried in the pot was something with a grotesquely human shape. A root system that looked like a tiny, ugly baby, limbs, a face, all the wrong proportions. Dewey's heart leapt. His deadly nightshade had finally become mandrake. Mandrakes were astonishingly valuable. Mature ones were potent restoratives, able to reverse transfigurations and powerful curses, and were key ingredients in many advanced potions. They were rare even in the magical world, and required the right environment to thrive. Dewey had feared his attempt had failed, so this discovery was a thrill. He should have had time to be proud. Then the mandrake screamed. The sound was a high, piercing wail. It hit Dewey like a hammer blow to the back of the head. A splitting headache and waves of dizziness that nearly made him collapse. Oh no, he realized too late. He'd forgotten the mandrake's cry. Fighting the urge to black out, he jabbed the wand and shouted the only spell he could think of. Petrificus Talis! The wail cut off instantly. Dewey exhaled in relief, and then turned to see Bilbo lying on the ground, eyes rolled back, unconscious. Hastily, Dewey covered the mandrake's head with soil again and carried Bilbo inside. Fortunately, the mandrake was still immature. Its cry could not kill, only render a person unconscious for a time. Dewey had a stronger threshold and had managed to resist, but Bilbo had been closer to the sound. 2 hours later, Bilbo came to, clutching his head. Dewey handed him a cup of calming potion. Bilbo grimaced at the taste but drank it, and color returned to his face. "What happened?" he asked, still dazed. Dewey apologized and then explained. "I'm sorry about this. It's a mandrake I cultivated. I thought the cultivation had failed, so I hadn't been checking the pots closely. The crying you heard was from it." Bilbo listened, partly horrified, partly fascinated. "Will it do that again?" he asked. Dewey shook his head. "If left undisturbed in the soil, mandrakes are quiet. They only scream when pulled up. What it needed was fresh soil. The change triggered it. Mandrakes need regular repotting and very rich compost. In the wizarding world, we use dragon dung compost, but there aren't any dragons handy here in the Shire, so I'll have to use animal manure." Dewey grimaced at the practicalities. He proceeded to immobilize both plants, casting Petrificus talus on each mandrake, then repotted them with fresh fertilized earth. The work was foul-smelling and unpleasant. He came away feeling as if the stink clung to him everywhere, and he knew it wouldn't be a one-time job. Mandrakes would need regular soil changes until fully mature. There was consolation. Once the mandrakes had grown, he could make the powerful restorative potions he'd been dreaming of, and other things, like voodoo dolls, that required mandrake root. Dewey set the pots in a sheltered corner, continuing his daily magic watering and careful watch. As he waited for the roots to mature, word came to the Shire that another wizard had arrived. The Grey Wizard walked toward Hobbiton in his familiar gray robes, a vinewood staff as tall as he was in one hand and a pipe in the other. He did not go straight to Bag End. Instead, he stopped first at the Green Dragon Inn. The low ceilings of the Hobbit Inn were not made for a man of his height. Gandalf had to stoop low to reach the bar. "A pint of ale for me, please?" he called, then settled onto a stool, straightening with a relieved sigh. Conversation in the common room died away as every hobbit turned to stare in surprise and curiosity. Barney Butterbur, the plump innkeeper, blinked when he saw him, then brightened. "Gandalf, when did you get back to the Shire?" Gandalf smiled. "Hello, Mr. Butterbur. I'm just passing through and thought I'd rest my feet for a bit." Butterbur, clearly pleased to see him, set a pint down in front of him. "This one's on me." "You haven't been in Hobbiton for a long time, Gandalf," Butterbur went on as he dried a tankard. "Must be 10 years at least. Where have you been all these years?" Gandalf took a sip and answered simply, "Mostly traveling in the east of late." He reclined, watching the hobbits around him, then asked casually, "Has anything new been happening in the Shire?" "But everything," Butterbur enthused. "You won't believe it. Another wizard's been here, much younger than you, and he's staying in the village with Mr. Bilbo Baggins." Gandalf's curiosity sharpened. "A young wizard? What's his name?" "Duir," Butterbur said, warmed by the chance to tell a good tale. "He's a traveler like you. Went traveling once and made a name for himself. They call him the Tree Feller. He's supposed to have helped folk in the Xionglu area fight back the old forest trees." As Butterbur babbled on, an image of the young wizard formed in Gandalf's mind. Smoke from his pipe veiled his expression, and a flicker of thought passed through his deep blue eyes. Meanwhile, at Bag End, Duir had been busy for days. The two mandrakes Bilbo and Duir kept had entered adolescence and grown unruly. One had even tried to clamber out of its pot and make a break for the yard. Duir had caught it in time and immobilized it with a quick Petrificus totalis. Had it escaped and matured in the wild, its cry could have been deadly. To keep them from running off again, Duir had transfigured a small glass greenhouse beside Bag End, both a proper nursery and a secure prison. As the mandrakes matured, their shrieks grew more dangerous, so he fitted them with glass covers and extra soundproofing to muffle their cries. Because the cold still lingered, he had even dressed their pots in tiny knitted socks and scarves against drafts, hand-knit by Bilbo himself, who had stayed up through the night to weave them. Both wizard and hobbit fussed over the mandrakes as if they were troublesome children. One afternoon, as Duir and Bilbo were enjoying tea, there was a knock at the door. They exchanged a look of surprise. Who could it be? Bilbo hurried to open it and found a tall figure filling the doorway, his head nearly out of sight. "Gandalf!" Bilbo cried, stepping back a few paces and then breaking into a wide grin. "What brings you here?" Duir, cup paused halfway to his lips, turned to the door and saw the gray-clad figure leaning on his vinewood staff. Gandalf smiled down at Bilbo. "Hello, Bilbo. I was passing through the Shire and thought I'd rest my feet for a while. I hope I'm welcome." "Of course, most welcome," Bilbo said, stepping aside. "Come in, Gandalf. You've come at a perfect time. We were just having afternoon tea. Join us." Gandalf set his hat and staff down as he ducked into the room. He took in the sight of Duir seated by the hearth, and his expression brightened with interest. "It seems there's another guest," he said, smiling. Duir rose and made himself known. "Pleased to meet you, Gandalf. I'm Duir." Gandalf studied the young wizard, black hair and dark eyes, a quiet bearing, and his gaze lingered on the black robe Duir wore. There was a subtle, shimmering pattern about it that Gandalf recognized. "Do you know Goldberry, the river daughter of the Old Forest?" he asked. Duir understood at once why Gandalf had looked at the robe. He nodded with a small smile. "Yes. I once stayed with Tom Bombadil and Goldberry for a while. They were kind to me." Gandalf's regard deepened. Guests of Tom and Goldberry were rarely ordinary folk. To be shown such favor was a mark of character. Moreover, the robe itself, woven from black swan feathers and silver thread and blessed by Goldberry, was no ordinary garment. Bilbo, ever the gracious host, gestured at the tea things. "Sit, sit, there are biscuits and cakes enough for 3. They made a small, comfortable circle by the fire. Gandalf took a biscuit and, between mouthfuls, recounted where he had been. "I spent a few years with the Elves, then in the northern wastes, and later in the misty mountains before returning to Eriador." Bilbo's face lit with longing. "Are the Elves as beautiful as the tales say?" Gandalf's smile was gentle. "Their beauty is beyond simple words. You would have to see them for yourself. Friendly visitors are welcome if you ever feel the itch for an adventure." Bilbo shook his head, an affectionate mortification on his face. "I'm only a hobbit. Adventures would be dreadful. I'd miss breakfast, second breakfast, elevenses, luncheon, afternoon tea, and supper. No, thank you." Gandalf laughed softly and let the subject drop. He turned his attention to Duir. "Where did you come from before arriving here? From the Far East, perhaps? Your features gave me that impression." Duir answered simply, "No, I have not been to the East. My home lies very far away. This is my first time in Middle-earth." Gandalf looked at him closely. The wizard's long-learned instincts told him Duir spoke the truth, and yet that truth only deepened his puzzlement. Chapter 32, Gandalf's Guess. To Gandalf, Duir, the young wizard who said he came from beyond Middle-earth, was an enigma. When he strained to peer into Duir's spirit, something baffling stopped him, like a veil of mist that hid the soul's true shape. At the same time, Gandalf felt a familiar, sacred power in him, the blessing of Iluvatar. The discovery shook Gandalf. He was one of the 5 wizards, the Istari, sent by the Valar to Middle-earth, and the last of them to arrive. He was certain the Valar had sent no others, but now, faced with a youth bearing Iluvatar's mark, he found himself uncertain. Had the one, who dwells in the halls of eternity, intervened directly and sent another messenger? Duir felt the intensity of Gandalf's scrutiny and shivered as if the old wizard had seen straight through him. He stood stiffly and asked, unsettled, "Gandalf, is something wrong? Is there something the matter with me?" His thoughts broken by the younger man's voice, Gandalf eased back into conversation. His gaze softened. He glanced at Bilbo and asked, in a guarded tone, "Wizard Duir, did you come to Middle-earth on a mission?" Duir's pupils tightened, his heart beat faster. Had Gandalf seen whatever system sheltered him? "I don't know what you mean," he said, forcing calm. To his surprise, Gandalf's face made it clear he understood, yet he did not press. Instead, he offered, "If you need anything, Duir, come to me." "Thank you," Duir murmured, still puzzled. Gandalf's warmth and readiness to help struck him as oddly intimate. A wild thought crossed his mind. Had Gandalf put him among his own kind? Embarrassed at the notion, Duir changed the subject. "Gandalf, did you come from the East on business this time?" Gandalf did not hold back. "I discovered a dark thing in Dol Guldur," he said. "There I found a dwarf king in bonds. At his request, I am to deliver his relics to his son." "A dwarf king?" Duir echoed. "Yes, Thrain II, king of Durin's line. Over 100 years ago, smog fell upon the lonely mountain and the dwarves were scattered. Thrain would not simply abandon the mountain. While traveling to seek news of it, he was seized near Mirkwood by orcs and taken to Dol Guldur. He suffered there, and when I found him, he was near death. Gandalf's voice went grave. Duir's mind clicked into place. Thrain the Sect was Thorin Oakenshield's father. Gandalf's task, then, was to take the relics to Thorin, an act that would set in motion the dwarves' march on the lonely mountain. The expedition was drawing near. Duir glanced at Bilbo, who listened with bright curiosity, wholly unaware that he would soon be pulled into the heart of that tale. Given Gandalf's cunning and foresight, Bilbo had already been marked as the one to accompany them. Duir felt a twinge of pity and relief. He would not interfere. The quest would be Bilbo's chance for adventure, and perhaps, Duir thought, the best chance to recover the One Ring. The ring was now in Gollum's possession, hidden in the misty mountains. If anyone was likely to find it, it would be the chosen hobbit, not Duir the Prophet. After tea, Bilbo and Gandalf smoked Longbottom Leaf until their pipes made clouds that drove Duir back a good distance from the hearth. Gandalf laughed heartily, and even urged Duir to try a pipe. Duir politely declined and went to the greenhouse to check on his 2 mandrake plants, about which Bilbo had been so intrigued. Gandalf, now curious, followed. At the greenhouse, Gandalf peered at the transparent panes and immediately recognized them as transmuted glass. "What marvelous transmutation!" he exclaimed. "It has changed the form of matter itself, transmuted one thing to another. Such power is rare." Gandalf admitted he could not do such work. He could weave illusion, but he could not alter matter's form the way Duir had. He saw the potential at once. With enough power, transmutation could affect all things, perhaps even the very essence of matter, opening possibilities close to creation ex nihilo. The thought only strengthened Gandalf's earlier suspicion. Such authority over matter was not the gift of the Valar. Who else but Ilúvatar could grant it? Inside, Duir handled the mandrakes with care. He checked them first to make sure they would not cry out. Mandrakes at the verge of maturity were dangerous. After removing their glass covers, he cast 2 Petrificus Totalis spells on them to hold their limbs stiff and mute. Had he known a Muffliato or a proper silencing charm, he would not have needed such a crude precaution. Gandalf crouched and regarded the humanoid roots Duir had pulled free of their pots. Their formed limbs and vivid little faces made him murmur in wonder. With Duir's permission, he took up one gently and examined it. "I feel strong magic and life in it," he said. "If I had not known you were its gardener, I should have thought it a sort of ent." He praised the work and, eager, began to help, dressing a mandrake in a tiny baby suit and repotting it under Duir's instruction. "I think Radagast would be much like you," Gandalf said. "He is another wizard who dwells among the trees and tends beasts and plants. I should like to introduce you." Duir knew of Radagast, the brown wizard, one who loved the forests and the creatures of them. Unlike Gandalf, who roamed to rally the free peoples against Shadow, Radagast preferred the company of birds and beasts. Because he neglected some of his wider duties, the Valar did not grant him return to Valinor after the War of the Ring, but Duir suspected Radagast would be content. For Radagast, what could be better than staying in Middle-earth among flowers, birds, insects, and fish? Chapter 33, Wands and Staves. After finishing with the mandrake, the 3 of them returned to Bag End. Bilbo was already bustling about the kitchen, getting dinner ready. Gandalf, who had long since noticed the little wand Dewey used to work his spells, finally asked to see it. Dewey did not refuse. He was equally curious about Gandalf's staff. Gandalf gladly handed the staff to Dewey and took the wand, turning it over in his long fingers. "What a clever combination," Gandalf murmured, inspecting the shaft as if he could see into its grain. "Magic-infused wood for the core. Wait, this heartwood, did it come from the old willow in the old forest?" Dewey nodded. "The old willow pushed into Buckleberry. I fought it and cut it in 2. Tom took the lower half back to the old forest and replanted it. I used the heartwood from the upper half for this wand." Gandalf's face lit with recognition. "That willow had a foul temper. It even set upon me when I went to visit Tom. Took some doing to get rid of it. It was unlucky for that tree to meet you." He continued to study the wand, his eyes narrowing as if following threads inside the wood. "And the core, a strand of hair? No, two strands. I sense the river and the earth. Goldberry and Tom? Dewey stared. Gandalf's insight had surprised him. He nodded again. Goldberry's hair and Tom's beard. Then Goldberry and Tom have put their hopes in you, Gandalf said, the corners of his mouth lifting. He looked at Dewey with new admiration. They're good people. Dewey felt a warmth in his chest. Aside from Bilbo, Goldberry and Tom were the two he felt most fondly toward. Gandalf, holding the wand, waved it with the air of an old child discovering a new toy. To Dewey's astonishment, the wand answered him, sputtering a riot of colorful sparks and tiny fireworks into the air. Wow! Bilbo and Dewey both exclaimed, watching the little displays with wide eyes. Gandalf laughed like a boy and sent flashes of lightning, a gust or two of conjured wind, and even a flicker of flame from the tip before setting the wand down. He regarded Dewey with bright, starlit eyes. Duir, this is a brilliant idea. A simple pairing of heartwood and hair, and anyone with magical potential can use it. It doesn't greatly amplify power, but it's versatile and balanced. Allah himself would be pleased. Dewey flushed at the praise. He knew the method of making such a wand came from another world and felt a little undeserving of such grand compliments. Gandalf took his modesty for humility and went on. Mark my words, Duir, many folk will prize this craft. Make one, and many races, elves, dwarves, other folk, will come to you for one. Isn't that a bit much? Dewey said, puzzled. Can't a staff do the same things? Gandalf nodded toward the staff he'd lent Dewey. Try it. Dewey took the staff between his hands. It rose taller than he was, carved from some vine-like wood that spiraled and flared into a blooming crest at the top. The surface was rough, as if left unpolished, and set into that flowering crown was a fist-sized blue gem that gave off a faint, steady glow. He channeled a little of his magic into it and spoke the word as if testing a light. Lumos. Magic surged from him wildly and much more than he expected. The staff behaved like a greedy vessel, gulping his power, drawing it into the gem until the jewel glowed like a rival sun. A blinding white light filled bag end. Everyone instinctively shut their eyes. Bilbo was too slow and stood there with tears streaming, his vision stunned. Dewey felt the world swim and let go of the staff, cutting off the flow. Gandalf sat rubbing his eyes, a grin creasing his face. Ha! You nearly put out these old eyes. The rest of my old bones are nearly as rotten, too. He chuckled, then glanced at Bilbo with concern. How are you, Bilbo? All right? Bilbo blinked, still watery-eyed. I'll be fine in a moment, he managed, blinking away the after-images. Dewey, his heart still thudding, turned back to the staff. It's incredibly strong, he said, but it drank all my magic, and I had to hold it with my mind to guide it. Exactly, Gandalf nodded approvingly. A staff needs more than raw magical power. It demands a strong mind to direct and shape that power. The requirements for those who can wield one are strict. And making a staff is no easy thing, Gandalf added, tapping the gem at the top. That jewel is the core. Magic gems are rare. I had to accept one from an elven friend to craft mine. He looked at Dewey with renewed warmth. Your wand is not as powerful in raw force, which is why I called it brilliant. It opens the door for those whose power is smaller, but whose need for precision and versatility is great. Dewey let the meaning settle. He had not imagined his simple technique would earn such approval from Gandalf. Still, the staff had stirred something in him. Though it demanded so much, magic willpower, the power it could call forth was monumental. A staff could marshal the elements of a place and shape them on a grand scale. The wand and the staff, he realized, were two divergent philosophies, the staff vast and sweeping, the wand precise and subtle. Dewey was a grown man. He wanted both. Chapter 34, Invitation. As Dewey stood admiring the staff in Gandalf's hand, the wizard surprised him with a request. Dewey, would you make a magic staff for me? Dewey blinked. Gandalf, you already have a staff. Why do you need another? Gandalf gave a sly wink. A wizard should always have a spare. If one staff is lost or broken, it is safer to have another. Besides, if you help me, I'll help you. I'll make you a staff in return. Dewey's heart leapt at the offer. A new staff in exchange for one? He agreed quickly. Gandalf, seeing the eagerness, added a caution. A proper staff needs a magic gem at its core. Such gems are rare, kept by ancient elves or dwarf lords. I don't expect to find one quickly. Don't be impatient. Of course, Dewey said. I know such things take time. I'm not in a hurry. Over the next hours, Gandalf entertained Bilbo and Dewey with tales of his travels across Middle-earth, Rivendell's serene beauty, the golden mystery of Lothlorien, the shadowed depths of Mirkwood, and the perilous passes of the Misty Mountains. He spoke of elves and dwarves, of men in strange lands. Bilbo and Dewey listened as if the scenes were being painted before their eyes. Bilbo was lost in the romance of it. Dewey, more practical, wondered what rewards might be found at each stop. Gandalf noticed their reactions and smiled. "Dewey, Bilbo," he said, "on my way back I intend to deliver Thrain-2's relics to his son, and I have another plan. I'm organizing a company to go to the Lonely Mountain and look into the matter of the dragon Smaug. I would like you both to come with us." "Adventure?" Bilbo recoiled instinctively. No, I am a hobbit of Bag End. I like peace in my pipe. Gandalf, find someone else. I want nothing to do with dragons in danger." Gandalf wasn't easily put off. He leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "Bilbo, set aside your fear for a moment and listen to what your heart truly wants. Haven't you ever wondered what lies beyond the hill? Those books of adventure, did you not imagine yourself in them? Remember, you have took blood in you. Your kin had their adventures. Why not inherit a little of that spirit?" For a moment, Bilbo's face shifted. Pride and imagination stirred in him. The Took side of his nature trembled awake. Dewey noticed the change too, but his gaze drifted to Gandalf's hand and then narrowed thoughtfully. Though he could see nothing, he suspected the wizard had touched something unseen. He suspected Narya, the Ring of Fire. From what Dewey knew of the Great Rings, Narya could kindle courage in others. The story of the rings, as Dewey had heard it told, was a dangerous but fascinating one. Long ago, Sauron, posing as Anatar, taught the elven smiths much of their craft, leading to the forging of many rings of power. 7 went to the dwarves, 9 to men, and the Dark Lord himself secretly made the one ring to dominate them. Celebrimbor, however, used the knowledge he was given to forge 3 elven rings without Sauron's hand: Narya, the Ring of Fire; Vilya, the Ring of Air; and Nenya, the Ring of Water. These 3 were not tainted by Sauron's touch, though their making was woven from the same craft, and therefore they were still, in a sense, linked to the One. Their wielders used them sparingly, lest they attract the Dark Lord's notice. Galadriel, bearer of Nenya, used its power to preserve Lothlorien in a timeless green. Elrond, with Vilya, kept Rivendell a refuge and a place of healing. Gandalf, it was said, had Narya. Its influence lent courage to those who listened, kindling defiance against shadow. Even so, the effect was subtle, and the wearers exercised restraint. Despite Gandalf's gentle urging and whatever the ring's influence tried to stir, Bilbo's longing for a quiet life proved stronger. He shook his head. "Those great adventures belong to a different age. My great-great-great-great-uncle's time. I am a Baggins. I am content." Gandalf looked surprised that Bilbo was so ready to resist, then turned his attention to Dewey. "And you, Dewey? Will you join us?" Dewey had not expected the invitation. He liked the sound of it, but he did not leap into acceptance. "If you want me along," he asked, "what would you have me do?" Gandalf answered earnestly, "We will pass through dangerous country. I will need someone to protect the company and see them safely to the Lonely Mountain when I must leave." "You'll leave the company?" Dewey asked, startled. Gandalf's face grew serious. "I've been in the Misty Mountains for months, and I found something disturbing. A sharp increase in orc numbers, more organized than before, too organized. There are signs of a new leader arising. I have also heard rumors of more frequent necromancer activity in Dol Guldur. I suspect a powerful evil is stirring and coordinating these movements. To keep orcs and dragon from joining forces, and to uncover what the necromancer is doing, I must investigate parts of the Misty Mountains and Dol Guldur myself. I cannot be with the company the whole time. That is why I would ask you to take charge of their safety in my absence." Dewey's expression hardened as he listened. The matter was graver than treasure hunting for him. This was about preventing a greater menace. He straightened. "Very well. I will go with you and protect the party." Gandalf broke into a pleased smile. "Welcome to the Lonely Mountain expedition, then." Chapter 35. Thorin Oakenshield. They were traveling on the Great East Road, west of the Shire. Gandalf and Dewey rode in a small cart pulled by a pony called Little Stuffy, making a leisurely westward pace toward the Blue Mountains. After Smaug had taken the Lonely Mountain, Thorin Oakenshield had led the exiled Durin line to settle in those western ranges. Gandalf carried with him heirlooms entrusted to him long ago by Thrain the Sixth. He had come to hand them over to Thorin. Dewey had come along on the pretense of visiting the heir of Durin, but in truth he meant to register himself with the folk of the Blue Mountains. "Gandalf," Dewey asked at one point, "there are only the two of us. Are you certain you can persuade Thorin to turn his people back to the Lonely Mountain?" He was kneeling in the cart as he spoke, wand in hand, having just used Petrificus Totalis to freeze two mandrakes that were writhing and trying to burrow out of their pots. They were nearly mature. Their screams when they came could be lethal. Even Dewey handled them with care. Gandalf puffed contentedly on his pipe and smiled. "I have a fair bit of faith in my tongue. Besides, the Lonely Mountain is the home of the Durin folk. After so many years under the dragon, I think those who have been displaced will be eager to reclaim their own." He glanced at the two sodden, rigid mandrakes and shook his head gently. "Poor things. Why did you bring them all the way here? Wouldn't they have been safer in Bilbo's greenhouse?" Dewey made a face. "I wouldn't trust Bilbo with mandrakes for all the mithril in the world. I'd come back to find him gone." A week later, they reached the foot of the Blue Mountains. The exiled Durin folk had made their homes in old mines and tunnels left behind when the great dwarf cities of Belegost and Nogrod fell into ruin. A little town clustered before the cave mouths where lives were lived among shafts and forgotten galleries. Dewey had never seen dwarves before. He stared at them with a continual curiosity. They were only a little taller than hobbits, to Dewey's waist at most, but their faces were rugged, shoulders broad, and bodies compact. Even the women wore beards, and without the cut of their clothing, it was sometimes hard to tell the sexes apart. The dwarves, in turn, eyed the two strangers with guarded interest. Gandalf ignored the stares and went about his business with his usual friendliness. "We're looking for Thorin Oakenshield. Can anyone tell us where he is?" A dwarf pointed them toward the innermost forge. "He's in the smithy," he said. "The blacksmith within. Go there." They went. The forge roared. Heat rolled from the bellows, and the anvil rang with the regular thunder of a hammer. A short, heavily muscled dwarf worked at the anvil, leather-wrapped arms bared as he raised a heavy hammer and struck a glowing bar of iron. Long black hair and an even longer beard framed a face concentrated on his craft. Sparks flew with each blow. Gandalf stepped forward and called politely over the din. "Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain, grandson of Thror. May I introduce myself? I am Gandalf the Grey." He gestured to Dewey. "This is Duir, called Dewey, the black-robed wizard who travels with me." Thorin barely seemed to hear. He kept hammering, rhythm steady. Gandalf wandered to a shelf, picked up a greatsword and turned it in his hands, admiring the workmanship. "The dwarves' skill with arms is indeed admirable," he said softly. "Not a whit behind the elves." At the word elves, Thorin snorted, a sound full of contempt. He stopped long enough to look up, eyes cold and calculating. "What do you want with me?" he asked. Gandalf got to the point. "Thorin Oakenshield, as heir of Durin, will you accept the duty of your line, to reclaim your homeland and see the Lonely Mountain restored?" Thorin's expression hardened. "Do you forget that the mountain is held by a vile dragon?" he shot back. "The Durin line is dispossessed and scattered. Do you think we have the strength to fight a dragon?" Gandalf shook his head. "From what I have learned, the dragon sleeps for long stretches. You would not need to face him frontally at first. There is a way to rally your people without a suicidal assault. Recover the Arkenstone. With it in your hands as rightful heir, you can call the scattered dwarves together and form the force that will drive the dragon from his halls." Something flickered in Thorin's eyes. The suggestion clearly stirred him. But suspicion remained. "And what would you have in return for such counsel?" he asked sharply. Gandalf's gaze was quiet and earnest. "I ask nothing for myself. I have other reasons. I have seen orcs begin to move and to organize, and that suggests a leader has risen among them. If a king of orcs and the dragon should ever join forces, the consequences would be grave. I want the dragon removed as a threat before such a union can be made. The dwarves' strength would be vital in that task." Thorin's eyes flicked then to Dewey, who had stood silent through the exchange. The dwarf's look of suspicion made Dewey bristle a little. "I'm here at Gandalf's invitation," he said in a cool voice. "I have no interest in ruling your affairs and do not intend to pry." Gandalf's tone sharpened with approval. "Duir is a powerful wizard. He has aided hobbits against the horns of the old forest and gone down into the Barrow Downs to face their wights and come back alive. His name is known across Eriador. If you are to reach the Lonely Mountain safely, or to confront the danger there, Duir would be a great asset." Hearing Gandalf speak so earnestly, Thorin's gaze at Dewey took on a different cast. Less suspicion, more calculation. Gandalf's reputation was well known among dwarves, elves, and men, a man of wisdom and action who often appeared where help was needed. Thorin did not lightly doubt him. The forge flames hissed. The anvil rang again as Thorin raised his hammer. For a long moment he did not speak. Then, with the slow gravity of one who carries a claim that weighs on him, he set the hammer down and looked at the two visitors. "I will consider what you say," he said at last, voice low. "But the road to the mountain is long, and the debts of the past are not so easily repaid." Gandalf nodded once. "That is all I ask for now. Talk with your kin. Think on it." Outside, the blue mountains kept their cold, secreted rhythms. In the smithy, among sparks and embers, a very old thread of destiny had begun to move again. Chapter 36, Ancient Runes. Dew felt a little embarrassed by Gandalf's praise. He knew the old wizard liked to flatter, and he wasn't so arrogant as to believe his own magic superior to Gandalf's. Gandalf, however, had larger matters on his mind. From a cloak pocket he produced a small golden key and a folded map and handed them to Thorin. "This is what your father left you before he died," Gandalf said. Thorin's face tightened at the sight. After Smaug took the Lonely Mountain, the During line had scattered. Some settled in the Blue Mountains. Thrain, however, had refused to abandon their ancestral home. He led an expedition to investigate the mountain and was never heard from again. Gandalf sighed. "I once slipped into Dol Guldur when I suspected a dark presence there. I found Thrain imprisoned. He had been kept there for many years. He was broken in body and spirit, and there was not much time left. Before he died, he gave me this key and map and asked me to give them to you." Thorin stood quiet, eyes fixed on the keepsakes in his hand. Gandalf offered no more words of comfort. He rose to go. "When you've made your decision, I'll be at the Prancing Pony in a month," he told them. Thorin didn't answer. As Gandalf left, Dewey followed him a few steps and called, puzzled, "How do you know he'll come?" Gandalf smiled. "I saw something in his eyes, the fire to take back what was his. He will come." "Very well, Dewey. We part ways here," Gandalf added, turning back to him. "I must travel elsewhere first to gather some information, so I can't accompany you." Dewey nodded and didn't press him. When Gandalf had gone, Dewey pulled the small device tucked under his cloak and spoke softly. "System, sign in." The interface had been waiting for discretion. It activated now that Gandalf and the others had left. A message blinked into being. "Signed in at Blue Mountains, Dwarf Town. Congratulations, you have received the Dictionary of Runes." Dewey stared for a moment, then opened the book. Ancient runes, or simply runes, were pictorial symbols infused with magical meaning. Each rune embodied a specific concept or power. When combined, they produced all manner of effects. In alchemy, runes were inscribed on items to enchant and strengthen them. In short, runes were a prerequisite for learning alchemy. The book's arrival stirred a familiar hunger. At Hogwarts, ancient runes was an elective in the 3rd year. Alchemy wasn't taught until the 6th or 7th. Alchemy itself was not merely casting a spell. A conjured charm could be broken or dispelled and the object returned to its inert state, but an alchemical creation held its magic even if someone tried to undo it. Remembralls, golden snitches, quick quotes quills, wizard chess, sneakoscopes, the night bus, the Hogwarts Express, the Mirror of Erised, Pensieves, time turners, even the legendary Philosopher's Stone, were all products of alchemy. It reached into every corner of the magical world. Dewey wanted that craft. As a wizard, he already lived longer than ordinary humans, but not on the scale of elves, and perhaps not even as long as the Dunedain. If he wanted to extend his life further, the Philosopher's Stone was one path, but that was a distant dream. For now, mastering ancient runes and building a foundation in alchemy was his immediate task. The Dictionary of Runes was thick and dry, full of precise meanings and careful diagrams. It would take patience to work through it, but Dewey felt the excitement of something new. He didn't rush back to his carriage. The dwarf town was a honeycomb of tunnels and forges, a place of pickaxes and anvils where metal was coaxed from rock and shaped into instruments of war and beauty. Dewey strolled the market streets and noticed weapons and armor sized for humans on display, strange among dwarf-sized wares. When he approached, a stout shopkeeper hustled over. "What weapon do you need, guest? Tell me and we'll make it. If it's forged by our hands, I guarantee the quality." Dewey pointed at a gleaming silver cuirass and asked, curious, "Do humans really come here to buy armor?" The dwarf puffed out his chest with pride. "Of course, our smiths are unmatched. Many humans dream of owning a weapon forged under Durin's halls. We have trade channels with them. These are custom pieces." Dewey understood then why the dwarves had been so wealthy in the Lonely Mountain. Skill and commerce had brought riches, which in turn had stirred the dragon Smaug's hunger. He picked up a long sword forged for a human and judged it by feel, sharper, harder than most human-made blades. He set it down and asked, "Master, I have an old sword that needs restoring. Can you bring it back to its old sharpness?" "Money's no object." The dwarf's eyes lit up at the promise of gold, but he kept his temper. "First I must see it to judge the damage." "Where is it?" the dwarf asked. Dewey waved his hand. A great sword rose silently from the carriage parked nearby and hovered before the shopkeeper. The dwarf stepped back, startled. The desire to overcharge vanished at once. Deference replaced greed. "So you're a wizard," the dwarf said more respectfully. "Forgive me for not recognizing you." "Just tell me if it can be restored," Dewey said. The dwarf took the sword in gloved hands and peered closely. The metal was pitted with corrosion, a dull, gnawed surface. The alloy looks like cast bronze, sound metal and well forged, quite large for this style. Numenorian workmanship, perhaps?" A flash of admiration crossed Dewey's face. It was dark magic that corroded it, a white's touch. "I had it purified, but the cleansing stripped it of its former edge and power. Can you make it like new?" The dwarf frowned and shook his head slowly. "If it's just a surface polish, that's no trouble, but to truly restore its original hardness and keen edge, you'd have to reforge it, melt it down and craft it again." "Then reforge it," Dewey said bluntly. The dwarf hesitated. "Our small furnaces can't reach the temperatures some Numenorian blades require. We have only one large forge capable of that, and to use it requires the owner's permission." "Who owns it?" Dewey asked. "The king," the dwarf replied. "Thorin Oakenshield." Chapter 37. A Deal with Thorin. Half a day later, Dewey found himself back inside Thorin Oakenshield's hall. Thorin's sharp eyes flashed with surprise when he saw him. "It's you, Black Wizard," he said, frowning. "So you're the one who commissioned Bondi to reforge that old sword?" Dewey had never liked Thorin, but he needed the dwarf prince's skill to deal with the Barrow-down sword. He inclined his head and answered in the formal tone he'd used before. "We meet again, Thorin Oakenshield, grandson of Thror, son of Thrain, king under the mountain. I recovered an ancient sword from a Barrow-wight. Time and the evil that clung to it have taken their toll. Its edge and temper are gone. I was told the dwarves are peerless craftsmen, and I've come to ask if it can be reforged." Thorin's expression changed. The dwarves, like many, feared the Barrow Downs and its creatures. He had heard Gandalf mention that Dewey had gone there alone, but to learn that Dewey had actually taken a sword from a wight made him see the man in a new light. He rose from his seat and, with the careful pride of a craftsman, said, "Forging is bread and ale to us. We will take this job." "May I see the sword?" he added. Dewey handed over the Barrow Downs blade. It was longer than Thorin, yet when Thorin took it, it felt almost light in his hand. He examined it closely, the kingly bearing falling away as the professional focus of a smith took hold. The blade has a diamond cross-section, good for both thrusts and cutting. The hilt is for one hand, the guard is a bronze crescent, and, he paused, tracing an inlaid mark with a finger, a white tree emblem. "A royal sword of the Numenorians?" Thorin asked confidently. Dewey nodded. "It once belonged to the last prince of Cardolan." Thorin's understanding sharpened. He knew Cardolan, split from Arnor, and what the Numenorians had once been, students of the Noldor, masters of the forge. Even a people as skilled as the dwarves would not underestimate Numenorian workmanship. He held the sword a moment longer, then looked up, eyes bright. I will personally oversee its reforging. I will bring our finest craftsmen. We will not only restore its edge and temper, we will make it stronger than it was. Dewey showed no outward elation. He met Thorin's gaze calmly and asked, "What are your terms?" Thorin's reply came briskly. "I want you to join the expedition to the Lonely Mountain. Help us deal with the dragon there." Dewey frowned. "Have you forgotten? I already agreed with Gandalf to join the expedition." He could not imagine Thorin making that a condition. Thorin shook his head. "You don't understand. I don't mean Gandalf's expedition. I want you with my company, under my invitation." Dewey's surprise hardened into alarm. The expedition wasn't yet organized, and Thorin was already claiming leadership, trying to draw followers away from Gandalf. Dewey answered firmly, "I agreed to join as an ally, not as someone subject to another's command. Whether the leader is you or Gandalf makes no difference. I will not be anyone's vassal." Thorin's face darkened. Ever since the dragon took the Lonely Mountain and Thrain had been cast out, Thorin had trusted few and relied on himself. Yet reclaiming the mountain was his obsession and his birthright. He was not about to yield the Endeavor's command to anyone. He tried another tack. "The previous terms remain. As heir of the House of Durin, I formally invite you to our expedition. You need not obey my orders, but you must pledge to help me fully in reclaiming the mountain. Will you?" Dewey considered him. He knew that Thorin and his kin would one day press their claim with or without him. Still, one sword was not worth committing to a life-or-death campaign. He shook his head and laughed softly. "Your terms are steep. One sword isn't worth that." Thorin's jaw set. "Then I will give you 1/10 of the hoard within the Lonely Mountain. Help us take it, and 1/10 of the treasures is yours." That perked Dewey up. The mountain's hoard was legendary, wealth enough to rival a kingdom. 1/10 of it would secure fortunes beyond imagining. "All right," he said at last, "but we must put it in writing." Dewey's caution had another reason. Thorin's line was known to be susceptible to dragon sickness. Prolonged contact with hoarded treasure could bring madness, paranoia, greed, a possessive fury. Thorin was not yet touched by that sickness, but a binding contract would protect Dewey's interests and ensure both sides kept their word. Thorin agreed without hesitation. He believed a written bond would bind Dewey more firmly to their cause than promises alone. And so, in front of a gathered company of kin and elders, Dewey and Thorin signed a formal contract. It laid out Dewey's commitments to the expedition, and in return, the House of Durin pledged the full skill of its smiths to reforge the sword and to cede 1/10 of the mountain's treasures should the Lonely Mountain be reclaimed. After the pact was sealed, Dewey stayed in Dwarf lands while the work began. The reforging would not take place in the town for show, but deeper still, in the old mining galleries of the Blue Mountains, far beneath the earth where magma's heat could be used as the forger's furnace. Dewey rode the dwarves' cable car and the rattling ore cart down thousands of feet, descending into a world of red glow and furnace breath. They reached a great basalt forge platform, a clearing carved into the living rock. Thorin and two mastersmiths stood at the anvil, sleeves rolled back to leather armbands. They swung enormous hammers in a steady, practiced rhythm, striking the white heat metal again and again. Sparks flew like tiny stars. Each blow rang through the cavern like a war song, precise and full of purpose. The three moved as one, strike, shift, strike, shaping the molten metal with a rhythm older than words. Dewey stood a short distance away and watched. Expectation filled him as the hammering echoed through the tunnels. Heat surged, but his long, heavy cloak remained cool against his skin, as if a mountain spring brushed it, warding off the furnace's breath. He watched the smith's work, feeling the weight of the bargain he had made and the slow, sure promise of steel being born anew. Chapter 38, Flame Sword. The dwarves had promised Dewey they would reforge the old sword into the finest blade they could make, and they were not the sort to break their word. To bolster the weapon's quality, they melted a small portion of their most treasured mithril into the ancient metal. Mithril was rarer than any iron or ore in Middle-earth, light as silver, harder than steel, and even a trace of it could turn a mere blade into a weapon that cut through iron as if it were soft clay. Even Narya, the ring of water among the 3 elven rings, was said to have a mithril band. Since the Balrog took Moria, the known source of mithril, the metal had become almost unobtainable. That the dwarves were willing to spare any at all for Duir showed both their sincerity and how eager Durin's folk were to reclaim the lonely mountain. Over 3 long days, Thorin and 2 master smiths hammered, folded, and tempered the ancient blade, reshaping it little by little. Just before the final quench, Duir stepped forward. To the dwarves' surprise, he approached the red-hot sword, drew his wand, and, in a motion like writing, traced symbols in the air over the blade. Runes bloomed across the metal as if inked by fire, faintly glowing as Duir poured magic into them. The marks shifted and flowed, strange and otherworldly. Thorin and his craftsmen exchanged astonished looks. "What writing is that?" one of them asked. They could sense power in the characters, magic on par with Elvish or Dwarvish script, yet they had never seen this form before. Duir grinned. "Runes," he said. "Runes?" They raised an eyebrow. "Our runes, are they not the same?" Duir slapped his forehead. He'd forgotten how easily the word could confuse. The Dwarvish runes, Cirth, were themselves a branch of Elvish script inherited from the Sindar. The runes he had just used, however, were not Cirth at all, but an ancient magical alphabet from the wizarding world. According to the rune dictionary he'd been studying, their origin was attributed to Odin, the so-called king of the gods, who is said to have hung himself from the world tree for 9 days and 9 nights, and sacrificed his eye to drink from the well of wisdom and learn the secrets of the runes. In the wizarding lands, Odin was more likely a mighty northern mage than a mythic god, but the script he left behind formed the backbone of old magic and alchemy. "These aren't dwarven marks," Duir explained. "They're wizard runes, magic runes." The dwarves understood and grew only more fascinated. Wizards with their own alphabet, few existed in Middle-earth, and each seemed to carry a world of secrets. Still, their task remained, and painting runes on the blade had only increased its potential. They hammered, quenched, folded, and polished until a golden longsword appeared, over 1 meter in length, exquisitely balanced and unsuperfluously elegant. Where the old blade had been bronze, the addition of mithril had given the sword a golden yellow hue with a silver-white sheen. Delicate, silvery patterns traced its fuller, making it look almost as though it had been forged of gold itself. Duir took the sword in both hands. It had been forged down in size and weight, much more suitable for him, and he immediately tried to channel magic into it. The runes he had inscribed flared to life. The blade burst into a scorching crimson flame that warped the air around it. He had planned this. While reading the rune dictionary, he had thought to combine dwarven metallurgy with wizard runes, and he had chosen the simplest fire symbols to etch into the metal. The sword responded exactly as he'd hoped, and then some. Eager to test it, Duir struck a nearby wooden stake. The blade bit and split it in half, and the sword's flames leapt onto the timber, racing up until the stake was engulfed. Thorin's pupils narrowed in disbelief. If this blade met an enemy, it would not only cut, it would burn its victim to ashes. The 2 craftsmen, after their initial shock, were elated. To have forged a weapon of such power would ensure their names would be remembered alongside it, a dream for any smith. Thorin recovered first. "What will you call it?" he asked. Duir set the sword down, and the flames winked out, the runes hiding once more. He stroked the blade like a treasured thing. "Flame Sword," he said simply. "It will be called Flame Sword." "A fitting name," Thorin murmured. "May it shine brightly in your hands." "It will," Duir promised. They spent another day fashioning a scabbard, ivory wrapped in gold, finely carved and set with gleaming gems. With the sword sheathed and belted at his side, Duir would have looked every bit the part of a knight if he had put on armor. Thorin lingered. "Stay a few more days," he urged. "I've sent a raven to my kin. When they arrive, the expedition will be complete." It wasn't friendship that made Thorin hesitate so much as politics. He wanted to bind Duir to his cause so he could stand with Gandalf in leading the quest for the Lonely Mountain. Duir had sensed it from the start. Thorin Oakenshield was proud, stubborn, and deeply suspicious of outsiders. Those traits could be born in small doses, but once the dragon sickness of the mountain's treasure took hold, Duir knew Thorin's distrust would harden into something dangerous and tribal. Despite the pleasant companionship of the past days, their relationship remained transactional. I must go on, Dewey said, shaking his head. I have other matters to see to. I'll meet you in the Shire. Under Thorin's silent look, Dewey hitched his carriage and left the dwarven town. He had not been lying. While he'd been in Thorin's halls, he'd noticed his 2 mandrake plants growing restless. The pustules on their faces had smoothed, signs they were close to maturity, and he could not risk them screaming loose in Dwarfhold. He wanted to return to the Shire where he could safely prepare them. The journey took 7 days. Halfway along the road, both mandrakes made their final signs of maturity and began to bud. A mature mandrake was a deadly thing. Its scream could kill, so Dewey had to keep them suppressed, regularly applying Petrificus totalis so they wouldn't wrench themselves from the soil and cry out. He tended them carefully the whole way. On the afternoon of the 7th day, he arrived back in Hobbiton, the familiar green hills of the Shire rolling away under a gentle sky. The flame sword hung at his side, the runes sleeping for now, and the mandrakes lay safely bound in their pots as Dewey set about the next stage of his work. Chapter 39, Making a Voodoo Doll. Duir! Bilbo cried, delighted to see his friend return, and ran out into the yard to meet him. Duir smiled and said, I'm back. He waved his hand and the luggage from the carriage floated down. From the piled bundles he produced a dwarf-forged dagger and handed it to Bilbo. For me? Bilbo asked, surprised. Dewey nodded. It was a gift he had carefully chosen, no divine weapon, but a finely made blade by dwarf craftsmen. He remembered Bilbo would need something when they reached the Trollshaws. This dagger would do until then. Bilbo hugged the dagger like a treasure. Thank you. I love it. Glad you do, Dewey said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, Could you prepare a dark room for me? I need one. A dark room? Bilbo blinked, puzzled, but he didn't press. Only the deepest cellar. Besides some wine, there's nothing down there. You can use it. Perfect. Thank you. Dewey nodded and took the dagger with him for a moment, then returned to the greenhouse. He put the petrified mandrake back into its glass case, covering it with several layers of glass to muffle any sound. Then he selected another mandrake, the living kind, and carried it down to the cellar, along with a pot of black mud, 13 caged bats, a heavy sack of sea salt, and an earthenware basin. The cellar was appropriately dark. A single small skylight let in the faintest sliver of light, and there were no other gaps. Dewey sealed that last skylight and made the room pitch black. He pulled the mandrake free from its pot and replaced its soil with the black mud he had brought, mud dug from a graveyard at midnight on a full moon. Even thinking about how he had taken that mud made Dewey wince. It was not something he liked to remember. Then, with a calm that made the scene all the more chilling, he opened the cages, took one bat, slit its chest with the dagger, removed its heart, and let a few drops of blood fall onto the mandrake's root. He buried the bat's corpse in the black mud. He repeated this once every day, one heart's blood on the root each day, burying another bat, until 13 had been used. The cellar filled with a faint iron tang after each visit. Bilbo would see Dewey go down and come up smelling of blood. Bilbo wondered, but he was a good friend and kept his questions to himself. By the 13th day, the soil in the pot had turned foul and putrid. The mandrake itself had grown sullen and dark, like something grown entirely without light. At midnight on that day, Dewey pulled the mandrake from the mud. He poured sea salt halfway into the earthenware basin, set the mandrake inside, and buried it completely with the remaining salt, packing it tight so it could not break free. He covered the basin with a black cloth to keep it in darkness. Only when the moon rose would he uncover it and open the skylight, letting moonlight fall directly on the sea salt. For 7 nights, he repeated that ritual. Each time the salt darkened a little more until on the 7th night it had turned completely black. Dewey dug the mandrake out. It was dead, features warped, small eyes now wholly black and empty, radiating an uncanny ill omen. This was no longer a plant, but a cursed object, a voodoo doll fashioned from the mandrake. Dewey thought of the warning he'd read in Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection. Creating cursed objects with mandrake is like handing death his scythe. It reaps not only your enemy's suffering, but your own souls. He had not taken the warning lightly. Dark arts could twist a person if practiced too long. They left marks on temper and spirit, but the power of curses was unmatched in certain ways. Besides, Dewey had recently learned music magic from Tom, a bright, lively craft that seemed to rebalance him whenever the dark work left an aftertaste. That made Dewey confident he could use this tool without becoming what the book described. He wrapped the doll carefully in cloth and placed it in a small wooden box, an object that should not be handled or kept close for long. Superstitions aside, such things tended to bring bad luck if left unattended. Satisfied, he cleaned the cellar, removed any trace of the ritual, and left. The whole process had taken him more than half a month. Gandalf had not visited Hobbiton during that time. Dewey had no idea why. He guessed it would be soon, though. Gandalf and the dwarves would arrive, and the expedition would finally begin. So he settled into waiting, studying the runes in a dictionary and passing the days quietly. That evening, as Dewey and Bilbo were just sitting down to dinner, a knock sounded at the door. Bilbo exchanged a surprised look with Dewey. Who could be knocking at this hour? Dewey suspected the answer. Gandalf or the dwarves, but he said nothing and rose with Bilbo to see. Bilbo opened the door to find a broad, bald dwarf standing on the threshold. "I am Dwalin, at your service," he announced. Before Bilbo could respond, Dwalin strode into the house and made for the wooden chest by the door to scrape the mud off his boots. "That's my mother's dowry chest," Bilbo began, but the chest moved by an invisible hand before Dwalin's boot could touch it. He stumbled as if tripped, eyes widening at the empty space. Only then did he notice Dewey sitting at the table. "Amazing magic," he cried. "You must be the black-robed wizard Duir Thorin spoke about. Pleased to meet you." His attention, however, was quickly stolen by the food on the table. Without ceremony, he plopped into Bilbo's chair and began tucking in with rude and enthusiastic haste. Crumbs clung to his thick beard. He ate as if he had not had a proper meal in days.